Okay, well now I thought we would begin to start thinking about angles. And we've been measuring everything basically in sort of lengths, and x's and y's have always been lengths. We've been graphing things, we've been sort of going over and going up and so forth. But really there's a whole world of angles out there. And I want to start us thinking about angles and then moving from angles to looking at measuring angles in various ways, which of course will lead us to trig, an extremely powerful and very valuable sort of genre in and of itself. So let's take a look. Let me first begin by sort of telling you or reminding you about how we just measure angles. So if you look down here and you think of the axes in the standard position, when we measure angles in the plane like this, we always start on the positive x-axis. So right here is always going to be sort of our terminal or starting angle, starting edge rather of the angle. And then what we do is we always move in a counterclockwise direction to measure a positive angle. So for example, I would start to move up like this, and that would actually produce an angle right in here, the angle between these two rays, between these two red rays, and that would be the angle theta. And so for example, you can imagine this angle right here would be 45 degrees because it's right in between these two. This would be a 90-degree angle, and so forth. This would be a really big angle. This would be 180 degrees. That's something that's called a straight angle, in fact. You can come down here and so forth. And if you come all the way back around, that's actually going to be 360 degrees, one full time around. And it sort of looks like 0 degrees, and in fact 360 degrees is the same thing as 0 degrees. Because as you spin around, you see what happens is, even if you spin around a lot, you end up in the same place that you started, so that would be 0 degrees. Now, in fact, we give names to each of these 4 regions here. This is referred to as region 1, and this is referred to as region 2, and then region 3 and region 4. So we count them counterclockwise just like we measure the angles. So region 1, region 2, region 3, region 4. Now, angles that are pretty small, angles that are between 0 and 90 degrees, so any angle that's basically in the first region, those are actually called acute angles. They're so cute, they're so tiny. So they're called acute because they're small. This angle, as you already know, is called a right angle. It has 90 degrees. And if you have an angle that's actually greater than 90 degrees, but smaller than 180, so you basically live in the second quadrant, then those things are called obtuse. Those angles are huge. And remember, you always measure from here. Don't think that you start measuring from this line. You actually always measure from the positive x and zoom up to here. And then you see these angles would be called obtuse. And this is sometimes called a straight angle. It's 180 degrees. It forms a straight line. So that's pretty cool. Now, there's another issue, which is that, in fact, you could actually make your angle by going downwards, but that would be considered a negative angle. So if I go down in a clockwise direction, that's sort of bucking the tide. So that angle right here, I would call that a negative angle. So for example, this would be right here, negative 45 degrees. And this angle right here that I swept out from here to here would be negative 90 degrees. Now you may notice, in fact, that negative 90 degrees looks a lot like if I would have gone all the way around this way. And that actually is 270 degrees. So in fact, if you go around this way, that's 270. If you go this way, it's minus 90. Those two angles are actually called coterminal, which just means that you sort of end up in the same place. There's two ways of getting to everything. So in fact, that's all that's going on here. Okay, so now let me sort of make sure you sort of follow this quadrant stuff here. Let me just give you an angle, and let's see if we can figure out exactly what quadrant we'd be in. So suppose I say to you 235 degrees. Well, what quadrant would it be in? Well, from 0 to 90 is this quadrant, quadrant 1. From 90 to 180 would be this quadrant right here, which would be quadrant 2. 180 to, and this would be 270, 90, 90, and 90 is 270 would be here, and 270 to 360 would be in this range. So if I said to you 235, what you'd have is something that would be sort of right around here. So that would be in quadrant 3. So that would be in quadrant 3. What if I said to you minus 570? If I said to you minus 570, how would you figure that out? Well, you've got to sort of spin around a whole bunch and in a clockwise direction. Remember, negative means clockwise. So you have to spin around a whole bunch. So if you went around sort of once around, that would be minus 360. Right? Every time you go 360, you make a complete cycle. But now you have to keep going because you're minus 570. So you have to go another negative 210. And what happens if you do that? Well, this is negative 90. This is negative 180. Now that would be negative 270, so that's too much. So it's negative 210. It's right about there. Right about there. In fact, this little angle right here you can compute is just 30 degrees. That little teeny thing right in there, 30 degrees. So in that case, minus 570 would be in the second quadrant. And you can see how to figure these out. Where would 100 degrees be? Well, 100 degrees, you'd go just a little bit past 90, And so plainly that's going to also be in the second quadrant, but a little higher up. So you get a sense of the quadrants and how we measure angles. We always start from the positive x-axis, and for positive angles we sweep in a counterclockwise direction, and for negative angles we sweep in a No, we don't sleep at all. We sweep in a clockwise direction. So those are the very, very basics. This axis would be sort of either 0 degrees or 360 degrees. It would be the same. This axis would be at the 90 degrees. This axis would be considered sort of 180 degrees. This axis here would be considered 270 degrees. So this gives you a sense of how we're going to cut up the plane, how we're going to measure our angles. Up next, we'll start taking a look at different types of angles and how to combine them and how to look at them together. We'll start off slowly, but we're going to be building pretty fast, so stick with us.